Welcome, everyone. We have everyone pouring in right now. Glad you're here with us. We're going to give a few minutes for people to log in and to get going.
As you guys are filtering in, take an opportunity to introduce yourself. You can put it in the chat box there. Is that right, Kara? The chat box is where they put that? Yep. In the chat, if you want to say, we know we have a variety of people from different backgrounds and different locations, and we'd just love to learn more about you. So as we are allowing for people to trickle in, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box.
Hi, Caitlin. And a rally, we've got Mexico City. That's awesome. Florida, California. Erin says hello. Betsy says hello. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. This is great. I know, let's see if we have any numbers spike here in the next couple minutes and then we'll get started. But as we're waiting and as you're introducing yourself, I did want to let you know that this video is being recorded. So if you miss out on any information or there's the slides that Katie shares that you want to grab, you can go back and view that on the recording. You will also be getting a follow-up email after this webinar is over. And in that email, there will be a link to a handout with some of the information as well. I'll also be using this chat feature throughout the presentation that Katie will be giving to share some links to things that she's talking about. You can save your chat if you want to, or you can just copy and paste from your chat anything that you find interesting. And then also wanted to draw your attention to the Q&A tab that you'll have at the bottom of the top of your screen. If you do have questions throughout the webinar, please put those there. That helps us keep track of who is asking questions. If you have comments or anything like that, you can put them in the chat and just use that Q&A tab for actual questions that you want Katie to address. So without further ado, I think we'll go ahead and get started just so we make sure we have enough time. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Katie, and I'm going to turn myself off here.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. Hopefully you can all see that. Let us know if you can't, and Kara will attend to maybe some tech issues that might be on our end. But I am Katie Nees. I am the co-founder and director of Child Life Disaster Relief, and excitedly so, soon to be rolling out of the director role as we bring in a full-time executive director later this summer, 2020. That person will take CLDR to the next level, and we are very excited about the next phase in our organization's growth. I have been a certified child life specialist working in healthcare institutions for the last 18 years, and I currently work full-time in the emergency department at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. So jumping on in here, we want to start with a quick poll. Which of these statements is true? 1, both man-made and natural disasters have increased. 2, neither man-made nor natural disasters have increased. However, the increased media exposure builds higher awareness. 3, only man-made disasters have increased. Or 4, only natural disasters have increased. Give you guys a little bit of time there. And it looks like, Kara, I don't know if we need to physically share the poll or if they can already see it, but it looks like majority have picked number 1. Both man-made and natural disasters have increased. And unfortunately, you guys are right. These are the results here. It is true, the occurrence of both natural and man-made disasters have increased. This graph here is global natural disasters, and you can see here the steady rise there. The number of natural disasters has actually quadrupled in the last 30 years. This next slide here is man-made disasters. This is specifically focused only on shootings, so it doesn't encompass all man-made disasters, but this is shootings in the United States. And the 5 deadliest mass shootings in the US have occurred in the last 10 years. So it is not just our imagination. It is true that disasters have increased. Of course, this means that there's an increase in the number of people affected by these devastating events, and of course also an increase in the numbers of children directly impacted. The co-founder of Child Life Disaster Relief, Lindsay Murphy, and myself began looking into disaster relief when the 2010 Haiti earthquake affected an estimated 3 million people. The death toll estimates for that disaster was anywhere between 100,000 and 300,000, and the damage was staggering. This, of course, is just one small picture of some of the damage. We both wanted to go. We wanted to use our skill set in the midst of disaster, and we joined together to find out how we could go and do that. Disaster relief organizations and emergency equipment came flooding in. This is a picture on a runway of an aircraft that landed, opened up, and they had disaster relief and emergency equipment and organizations coming in quickly. This is within a week. As we watched these services start to flood in, we continued to search. How can we join who can we join that is working with the kids? We were surprised to find that it was very difficult to find any organized efforts or organizations or services that were being provided in those first weeks and months focused on kids and their coping. I believe that there were amazing individuals and groups doing some incredible work to help children deal with the situation in those weeks and months, but we couldn't find anything about it, and so therefore we couldn't join and use our skills. This is UNICEF and People in Need, who provided child-friendly spaces, and this picture is 6 months after the earthquake happened. However, we didn't find this information until a couple years after. So our search didn't stop. For the next couple years, we kept searching. I traveled to disaster relief conferences, and we met with key leaders in the field and asked only two questions. Is there a need? And if so, how do we meet that need? Some of the people that we interviewed, some of the many, was Dr. David Schoenfeld. He's the founder of the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement. Rachel Call, she works with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and Dr. Naomi Paget, chaplain and crisis interventionist for the FBI and disaster relief. She's incredible. So them and other people provided an answer, and it was a resounding yes, there is a need. There's a need for trained individuals to work with traumatized children. They reported that there are service gaps where needs are not met adequately or sometimes at all. And they pointed out that the government had recently at that time recognized the need. The National Commission on Children and Disasters 2010 report is a 190-page document that details the recommendations specific to meeting the needs of children after disaster. This includes their physical needs, but also their emotional and mental health needs as well. They specifically pointed to the need to pre-identify entities who are positioned to provide timely and effective delivery of services for children, including attending to their mental and behavioral health needs in the most critical moments. To answer the question, how do we meet that need? It involved understanding the disaster relief field. We learned that the field is heavily reliant on relationships of trust built over decades. And it's not hard to imagine why that might be. There can be a lot of well-meaning and capable individuals and organizations who want to provide a needed service after disasters. However, not all are able to reliably show up year after year and consistently carry out their mission. These organizations that run into the disaster together in moments of need year after year and provide a service and work together learn to depend heavily only on each other. They develop a trust that they know XYZ organizations will show up and will provide excellent care when it's needed most. We also learn that the systems put into place may sometimes feel a bit complicated or sometimes even a bit disorganized, but they are in fact developed with a high level of built-in flexibility to respond to each specific disaster. Every single disaster is completely different, and processes in place need to effectively reflect those needed differences in responses. One second here. So this is an elementary depiction of disaster response field that we created. It's not comprehensive or approved by the Red Cross or FEMA, but rather it's a simple graphic we want to use here to briefly depict our view of the field. Red Cross and FEMA typically have strong oversight, and they focus on several things, some of them included here, and revolve mostly around feeding and sheltering, some of the highest needs there. Within mass care and recovery for the Red Cross, for large-scale national disasters, the Red Cross specifically leans on an organization called Children's Disaster Services for all care for children. Children's Disaster Services has been providing care for children after disasters in the US for the last 4 decades. We are grateful to call CDS our first partner organization as of 2014, and we recruit and assist with training child life professionals to be part of CDS teams for large-scale national deployments. For small-scale community disasters, there is currently no nationally organized, consistent services for children, and CLDR has been working to build networks in various cities across the US to work toward meeting this need. Now, knowing that there are many extremely vital services that need to be provided as paramount to all other services, including food and shelter, it is easy and understandable to classify services for children as secondary. But you may have often heard people say things like, "Good thing they're so young." Sometimes services for children can actually be overlooked with reassurances of children are resilient. So that leads to our next slide. Let's take a minute here to look at resilience. Resilience is the ability to recover quickly. And vulnerability is the capability or susceptibility to being hurt. It is true that children are resilient. They have the ability to recover quickly. In fact, Carl Rogers, who has always been my favorite, developed client-centered therapy. This approach is built on the underlying belief that humans have a natural tendency to move toward healing and positive growth when given the opportunity to do so. If they did not previously get that opportunity, they can still move toward healing when given the chance. However, more recently, the idea that children are resilient has been called a myth, or a misunderstanding that can lead to a dismissal of a child's needs after trauma, which can lead to serious effects. Bruce Perry, in his book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog and Other Stories from a Child Psychiatrist's Notebook, describes a situation where he encountered children at the murder scene of their own mother. A colleague of his stated, "Children are resilient. They will be fine." However, Perry goes on in this book to describe why he believes that children are in fact more vulnerable to trauma than adults, and he believes those children that night are forever changed. So it is true that children are resilient. However, it is also true that children are more susceptible to being hurt, more vulnerable than adults to long-term negative impact from significant effects. This emphasizes the need for effective early intervention. Disaster trauma effects are influenced by many factors, including a child's developmental level, ethnicity and cultural factors, previous trauma exposure, available resources and pre-existing stressors, and repeated or ongoing trauma events. For children, sometimes the disaster's impact itself might not be as traumatizing as the multiple changes that occur after that event, such as temporary housing, unfamiliar routines, unfamiliar people. This is a picture from our recent deployment to Puerto Rico in collaboration with Betsy Gonzalez. She's an ER physician in Texas, and we deployed with her nonprofit, B&R Emergency Training Response, worked with the Puerto Rican children in school systems. The child life specialists we deployed worked with the children directly impacted by the recent earthquakes in Puerto Rico. And they, of course, found that many of the children and teens were hungry to also work through their experience from the 2017 Hurricane Maria that caused widespread devastation in Puerto Rico. This picture shows an activity they organized where the teenagers were split into small groups to collaborate on an art project to depict their experience with the disasters and also their current hopes for the future. You can see the dark portion split by the future hope of bright colors that they created together while they shared and supported each other. Immediately to several weeks after, behavior and reactions are often similar to the bereavement process and include developmental regression and emotional distress. Some scholars identify PTSD as a common response occurring in up to 40% of children within 3 months after an event, with symptoms that can be present more than 15 years after. This is a list of typical reactions to atypical events. The picture here is of my first deployment with our partner Children's Disaster Services after the devastating Moore, Oklahoma tornado in 2013. Many of the children showed a high level of hyperactivity, and we provided opportunities for them to safely play focused on that need. You might be able to see in the back there a cardboard box. We punched a hole in the bottom, taped it to the wall, and made a basketball hoop. And we played modified versions of basketball at different moments when that was the need. The children during that disaster chose on their own initiative to play out their experience. It was pretty amazing. I mean, one of the most powerful experiences I've been a part of. This is one picture of many, of an example of a child focused on construction work. And many of the children were especially focused on putting roofs on all their structures over and over again. And this is a picture from Children's Disaster Services deployment to Las Vegas in 2017 after the deadly shooting. These particular items were by far the children's #1 choice of toys to play with. And they initiated playing out rescue fantasies and capturing of bad guys again and again. We were able to join them as they played. The first several weeks is a crucial time for the development of resilience and positive coping. The American Psychological Association points to interventions that should be implemented by individuals who are trained in coping skills as part of evidence-based treatment, have experience working with crisis, disaster response, PTSD, and children's grief responses. Culturally sensitive, developmentally appropriate, focused on building quality therapeutic relationships based on knowledge about common reactions to trauma factoring in developmental level and guided by the unique experiences and needs of each child and family. Those of you who are child life specialists in the audience might have the same reaction as I did when I first read these recommendations. This is an excellent description of the skill set of a child life specialist. Kara will be sending a link in the Q&A from the Association of Child Life Professionals for those interested in more information here. But this list describes the main professional skills of a certified child life specialist. We focus on growth and developmental issues, developmental and coping assessments, play and therapeutic interventions, children and families' responses to trauma, grief and loss, cultural humility, and evidence-based practice. Child life specialists work in the midst of challenging situations. I work in the emergency department at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And during a trauma situation, I and my fellow child life specialists, we cover 24/7. I'm expected to be at the head of the bed, attending to the child or teen's psychosocial needs in that particular moment. There can be upwards of 15 to 20 medical professionals all crowded around the bed, and sometimes it's noisy. Sometimes it involves a lot of things happening simultaneously. So after a child has gone through an emergency event, such as a car accident, they then go through another event of having multiple staff members around, surrounding them, cutting off their clothes, examining them, placing IVs, and other invasive medical interventions very quickly. It can sometimes be scarier than the emergency event that led them to the ER in the first place. My job in those moments is to help the child find a sense of safety and calm with emotional regulation, as well as age-appropriate translation of all the things that are happening to them and around them. In some of the more intense moments, if I can keep that child's eyes on mine, I can help them match my calm, slow tempo, and I can relay information as well as questions and requests from the medical team directed to the patient. My goal is to attend to the child's mental and emotional needs to mitigate any trauma in that moment. But a secondary benefit is that the child can often better answer medical assessment questions from the medical staff and follow commands so that the medical team can obtain a more accurate medical assessment than of a child who is inconsolable. This is a picture from an article I found that Kara will also share in the Q&A for those of you on here live, and we'll also share it for the in the handout for those watching later. This is a child life specialist at Oakland Children's Hospital in California. The article is titled, "They Speak the Language of Kids," and it describes a few of the coping interventions child life specialists provide in healthcare institutions. I've had my family describe my role as a medical translator for kids. And I've always thought that was a pretty good way of capturing one of the ways that we help children cope in the midst of difficult situations in the hospital. Child life specialists also heavily rely on play to help children cope with their hospitalization, including helping them understand medical procedures, their illness or injury, and grief from bereavement. These same coping interventions also well align with the evidence-based interventions after disasters. So let's take a brief look at the best coping interventions after disaster based on timing. But before we do that, I want to pause here and ask one more poll question of you all. If you could take a moment here to think about an event or a situation in your childhood or teen years that was especially stressful for you. I'd like you to think about a person who was most helpful for you during that particular situation. If you cannot answer this question, or it hits too close to home, of course you do not need to answer this question, but for those of you who are willing and able, if you could choose from these 4 options, one or more that sum up what this person did that was most helpful. Number 1, someone who took the initiative to explain things to me during confusing or stressful moments. Number 2, someone who did not ask me direct questions, but was present and supportive. Number 3, someone who asked me direct questions about what happened, what I saw, experienced, and or how I felt, how I was feeling and thinking about the event. And number 4, someone who could relate to my specific situation because of a similar experience. Give you guys a bit more time on this one because I know it's hard. Okay, we can go ahead. I think, Kara, if you think it's ready, yeah, we'll share it here. Yeah, I was really curious what answers would come in here, and it does look like the first one is barely just 1% higher. So the first 2 here, someone who took the initiative to explain things to me during confusing and stressful moments, and someone who did not ask me direct questions but was present and supportive. Those are the number 1 and number 2 for helpful responses. That's great. Thank you guys for doing that. Now, every child and every situation is unique. There are no hard and fast rules to capturing what's most beneficial at any given moment. But as we go through these phases of disaster, you might determine that what helped you the most lines up with the evidence on best interventions based on timing for your specific situation. Or you might find that it doesn't line up at all. Mine actually doesn't line up with this timeline, but that doesn't disqualify or invalidate the effectiveness of the help you or I were given. Instead, this is a general summary of best interventions based on timing from the current literature, with an understanding that there are wide variances in this, as well as ongoing need for more research in these areas. But with that in mind, let's dive in. This slide shows the impact of disaster with the red star there, and then the common emotional reactions represented in each of these phases. This section describes typically the first hours and even up to 2 days after the disaster's impact. Sometimes the chaos can be at a peak during this time, and first responders flood to the scene. The best interventions revolve around psychological first aid. This involves providing timely and accurate information to promote an understanding that will facilitate adjustment, offering appropriate but not false reassurances that corrects misconceptions that might otherwise unnecessarily increase the sense of risk, and also supplying information about common reactions and practical coping strategies for coping with distress. As of right now, there are no nationally organized psychosocial services in place for this phase after a disaster, and we are working toward building networks in various cities across the US to build services into this phase. This section represents the first week to first couple months after a disaster's impact. The evidence-based coping intervention for children is focused on opportunities for child-led or child-directed play. The child-led approach gives the child freedom to process at their own pace and maximize on their own resilience. It involves adults 100% following the child's lead and not interjecting with adult direction or adult questions, such as, let's draw a picture of a tornado, or what was that like for you? It's not doing any of those things. The child-led approach sometimes can be seen as a lesser skill, but in fact, engaging a child in child-led play is a high-level skill and extremely important in this phase of disaster response. The research points out that the adult-led approach provided too early can actually disrupt or undermine naturally occurring resilience and can have negative effects. This is the time frame that Children's Disaster Services typically responds, and they focus entirely on providing safe play spaces and child-directed play opportunities within disaster shelters and family assistance centers. We are honored to be able to be a part of CDS teams as CDS volunteers for large-scale national disasters, both natural and man-made. It is amazing to join the children as they process through their experiences, through their own play, on their own initiative. Adult-led play and processing opportunities are where children and teens are asked to engage in activities and processing around their thoughts, feelings, and experiences with a disaster, and sometimes share together in groups with peers to build connection and to support each other. The research is varied on exactly when the transition from child-led play to adult-led play is most effective, but the literature describes it as beginning anywhere from 4 weeks to 2 months after a disaster event. We are thrilled to be partnered with Camp NOAA, who organizes week-long day camp opportunities for children in areas affected by disasters, approximately 9 to 18 months after a disaster event. Also, a quick note here that we work also with various physician collaborations to respond at various phases of disaster relief. And our child life specialist volunteers follow the evidence-based models for best interventions to meet the needs of children and teens. Often these opportunities are provided in more non-traditional areas, including pop-up healthcare centers, schools, and mental health centers. These are the current initiatives of Child Life Disaster Relief. We deploy child life specialists for disaster response with physician contacts to work in non-traditional disaster response settings, the ones I just mentioned. We work with our partner organizations, specifically CDS and Camp NOAA, to serve in traditional disaster centers, shelters, day camps, providing psychosocial services for children. We are establishing regional networks in various cities around the US through local program leaders to initiate a process of rapid psychosocial service delivery during disasters. We provide webinar trainings for child life professionals and a schedule of webinars coming that will go more in depth on each of the phases and the best interventions after disaster to better equip our responders for excellent service delivery. We also have principal resources on our website and currently are working on revamping all of those, as well as providing a short videos on practical ways to help children and teenagers cope after disasters. Our strengths include a database of over 1,400 child life professionals with a skill set that is well matched for meeting the needs of children after disasters. We also have a strong and growing leadership team and a track record of being able to pivot quickly to meet unprecedented needs. This was most evident with the pandemic response and our ability to mobilize more than 40 child life specialists for virtual coping through connection groups for children across the US. These represent a few of the areas we have our eyes on for future growth: expanding our deployment opportunities, expanding our regional networks for rapid service delivery, and expanding our resources and webinars to focus also on an audience of first responders who are seeking ways to help children on scene of disasters and emergency events. Our ultimate vision is to coordinate a global Our ultimate vision is to develop a coordinated and global network to ensure that children in disasters and crisis have the tools and support needed to promote positive coping and resilience. The need is great. We would love for you to join us to be part of the solution. Kara is sending links in the Q&A or the chat for each of these categories, and this will also be provided in the handout. So this concludes the presentation portion of this webinar. We are glad you took time out in your day to participate. And of course, I will say there's often lots of questions. Stay for a Q&A. You may enter your questions in the Q&A box and we will discuss together. Thank you all. Okay, one question here. How can I get more information about becoming a local program leader or connecting with my local program leader to get involved and help? Yes, great question. We would love to have you involved. And one of the fastest ways to figure that information out now is to send an email to info@cldisasterrelief.org. And Lindsay Murphy, who heads up that program, will be responding to you to get you information about maybe a local program that's already existing in your area or ways that you might be able to jump on board. We are working in that program to create a cohesive process around it. And because of that, we might delay some areas from starting up until we can get a good handle on some of the areas that we have going on now. We're learning from the areas that we are developing right now, and we want to use those learnings to jumpstart some other areas when it's ready to pull that trigger. What type of training education are you providing for cultural competence and awareness? Really good question. That is not something that we have dived into yet, and something that we need to. One of the things that we have kept as part of our awareness is that different areas and deployments, we try to prioritize responders that have a cultural understanding or awareness already themselves for that particular population. So that gives them a leg up of really providing the best care in those situations. So we prioritize those individuals. Do you have any ways for Child Life students to volunteer and get involved? Yes, our partner organizations, Children's Disaster Services and Camp NOAA, both take Child Life students to be a part of their responses, and we would love to have you involved in that way. We also have committees and hoping to start a few more committees coming up here to involve more Child Life specialists and Child Life students in some of our program development.
Katie, there was a question in the chat asking how long deployments usually last.
It varies a lot. Children's Disaster Services prefers a 2-week commitment, although that can vary even significantly. Sometimes we have sent people for a couple days at a time, but the best model is to have someone that can deploy longer. So that is their preference for how they sustain their work. And our deployments with our physician collaborations, we have kept to 1 week for various reasons. So that's one thing that we have available when the need arises and when the opportunity arises. And then for local responses, that could be, you know, an hour or or more than that. It just really depends on the situation. So lots of variety in there.
There was another question about Camp NOAA. I sent the link, but the question was asking where the Camp NOAA locations are and whether or not they're hosting camps this summer.
Yeah, I think that they are still in the process of figuring that out. I haven't gotten the latest update. I know we had several people interested in being a part of that this summer, and I have not gotten the most up-to-date information on what Camp NOAA has decided so far on that. So we will have to figure that out, but you can also email us at info@CLDR and we'll help facilitate getting some of that information for you. Great question. Question on the Q&A here. Are Child Life specialists the only ones who can deploy, or are our Child Life students allowed to do so? Yes, Child Life students can deploy with our partner organizations, Children's Disaster Services and Camp NOAA. For the deployments that we do with our physician partners, we restrict that to certified Child Life specialists. And for our local initiative and local responses, we also restrict that to certified Child Life specialists at this time to uphold the integrity of those responses. When deployed, what does housing look like? For our deployments as well as CDS deployments, we provide housing that can look different based on the disaster. Sometimes it's a shelter situation where you're on a Red Cross type cot with many other people around, and sometimes it's a hotel. We have had all kinds of varieties. Churches turned into shelters that staff have stayed and volunteers have stayed in. So it's quite a variety. We've even had some people with Children's Disaster Services that have stayed in homes together that were opened up, and the team was allowed to stay together in a home setting. So that's not as common, but that has happened. So it's just kind of a figure it out in the moment, but the most common is a volunteer shelter or a hotel.
Katie, I know you touched on this, but I'll ask a question. Will you just maybe go a little further into why you feel like the skills, I mean, I know we're talking mostly to child life specialists here, but why are the skills of a child life specialist, do they fit so well with the needs of kids right after disaster? particularly those first 24 to 48
The
hours.
first, yeah.
Make that a little more.
Yeah. So when you really look at the skills of a child life specialist, what we're doing in the midst of a crisis in the hospital is that immediate time frame, right? So that psychological first aid model is really what a lot of what we're doing, explaining stuff, clarifying misconceptions, making sure they have accurate information, because with inaccurate misinformation or misconceptions, their sense of risk and therefore their stress level is way higher, and their ability to recover can be damaged or affected by that. So it's that in the moment intervention of clarifying and guiding and teaching coping techniques, using play in order to do that. So what we do in hospital is very much aligned with those in the moment of the issue. So that aligns the most well with that first phase there of the first hours to 2 days, but it also translates very well into the next phases as well. What's interesting too is in those phases, of course, having one-on-one sit-down opportunities is not realistic or the most beneficial. Of course, some of the children and teens are going to need one-on-one professional help from psychologists and psychiatrists, and that's for sure and very valuable. In the midst of it, though, those one-on-one opportunities don't tend to be what's most helpful in those particular moments, similar to what we see in the hospital. It's those in the moment, right alongside the stress of the moment, we are walking them through it. And that translates just so beautifully well to the disaster relief field. Will the child life disaster relief trainings still be happening this year, or are they postponed? So I think you're probably referring to the Children's Disaster Services trainings. CDS does their trainings that we encourage and send a lot of child life specialists and students to over the last several years. Often people get it mixed up about whose training that is. That's our partner, Children's Disaster Services, that does those particular trainings. And they did just announce yesterday that they will not be doing any more trainings for 2020, just to be careful and smart, sensitive to the current situation. Our webinars for child life disaster relief, we're rolling out a webinar schedule. This is 101, and we're rolling out a webinar schedule that will continue. We'll be getting that information out, but we will be doing that. To deploy for national responses with our partner CDS, that training and that certification process through them has to be accomplished. And unfortunately for some, that's going to be delayed now. But we highly encourage it. It's a fantastic training and really a valuable resource, regardless of deploying with CDS or deploying it some other way. Is there an email list I can sign up for to hear about webinars? Oh, Kara, you want to answer that?
The best way, well, if you can follow us on social media, that's probably the best way for you to get that information. We are on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. I can put our links in the chat. Also, I guess we haven't done this, but we really should send an email blast out to our members every time we do one. So we'll start doing that. So probably the best way for you to get that information is to join CLDR as a member, and we'll get emails to you that way.
Yeah, great question. We are learning as we go. So getting good help from you guys to know how best to disseminate information is fantastic. Are there any resources, books, trainings outside your organization that you would recommend to assist anyone trying to increase their trauma, disaster support knowledge and skill set? Wow, that's great. Love the motivation there. If you have not taken the CDS training, it really is, has some fantastic content. So that would be a start. The trauma-informed care materials I found to be really helpful for this work. Oh, here's, I love this book, Childhood Disrupted, How Your Biology Becomes Your Biography Becomes Your Biology and How You Can Heal. This is about adverse childhood experiences. So the information about ACEs I find to be really relevant to this work as well. And we are hoping with our webinars to really roll out some more specific training. We're going to have one that's just dedicated to child-led play. It is very much, like I said, a form of play or intervention that is can be seen as lesser, maybe kind of boring and not very effective. We want to like do something, get in there, but really it's an active approach of letting that child lead. And it is not only so powerful, but it is hard to do sometimes. But when you do it and you watch the magic that happens by you not influencing where that play goes, it's completely mind-blowing to join those kids in those moments. So we will be having a webinar specifically focused on that intervention as well. What was the training that you just mentioned? It was CDS, Children's Disaster Services, our partner organization for some of our national deployments. And they have a training that they do. It's a 25-hour training. It has 5 modules of learning. They are excellent. And they focus on child-led play opportunities in the disaster relief field. And the training also includes an overnight shelter simulation so that potential volunteers can experience what that's like for kids and families in those situations, staying somewhere different and maybe lots of people around and snoring and new noises. So volunteers can experience that, gain some awareness for kids and families and what they're going through, but also experience what that might be like on a deployment for themselves. So it's a great hands-on training experience. Someone's asking about making sure that they are on the membership list. And yes, if you could send it, if anyone's curious about that, you can send an email to info@cldisasterrelief.org and give us your name and your information, and we will get back to you to make sure that that's in the system correctly.
I also just added to the chat for those wanting to learn more. We do have a resources and research page on our website, and I have linked that in the chat if you want to look there. And we're working on more research and resources, so that'll be updated regularly, hopefully.
Yes. Yeah, this is, and it's an exciting field. Definitely, Lindsay and I did not set out to start an organization. We just wanted to join stuff that was out there and use our skill set. And it led to identifying some real gaps in services, some of them being services for teenagers across all phases of disaster. That's one gap that isn't consistently met. CDS, Children's Disaster Services, is sometimes able to attend to those needs, but it's not a focus area of them. They focus typically on ages 3 to 10 or so. So we'd love for that to become a focus area and be able to jump into that avenue. Another area that's a gap in services is services for children with developmental disabilities, emotional disabilities of all kinds that maybe aren't able to utilize the current services that might be provided. And so specialized services for those children across all phases of disaster is another area we have our eyes on for really jumping into in meaningful and relevant ways. It's a slow going process to build organizational framework, foundation, and sustainability, as well as networks in order to meet some of those needs. But we are really excited about being well positioned to meet those needs, both with skill set, numbers of people that we have ready and willing to do this work, and growing networks within the disaster relief field to give us the opportunities to be able to make that happen. So pretty exciting to be a part of this. And what's made this work so well is child life specialists joining and creating momentum around this that really has spurred it forward. So we are deeply grateful for the enthusiasm and the commitment from our co-professionals that are wanting to jump in and do this work. Okay, if there's any other questions, you can pop them in. Otherwise, we are really grateful you guys took the time for this, and hope this was helpful and informative for you. We will have more webinars coming out, and thank you very much for taking the time. Bye, guys.
You should all be, just real quick, you should all be receiving an email with the certificate for completing this webinar as a follow-up to this. If you don't get it, feel free to email our email info@cldisasterrelief.org.